I am absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to welcome you to this inaugural symposium, which is, I have to say, it's the part of this whole weekend that I personally have been most looking forward to, because I was very much involved, along with a wonderful committee of faculty and students and staff in putting it together, and to see it all come together here and see this wonderful panel is very exciting to me. As you know, the theme for the inauguration is Stand Up, Speak Up, an Agenda for 21st Century Women. And as we talked about what kind of program we wanted to have as part of the inauguration, we realized that we wanted to capture that theme in some way, and we wanted to bring women of many different backgrounds and generations and life experiences and insights and wisdom together to talk about what it means to empower women in the 21st century. And our theme, therefore, is Stand Up, Speak Up, Empowered Women, Empowering Others. And I'm going to introduce our panelists. Do you have I guess I can introduce you in the order in which you're seated, but I'll end with our moderator. So let me begin with Professor Deepika Bari, who is an associate professor in the English department and director of the Asian Studies program at Emory University. She's the author of Native Intelligence, Aesthetics, Politics, and Postcolonial Literature, and editor of Between the Lines, South Asians and Postcoloniality, Realms of Rhetoric, and a special issue of South Asian Review on racial hybrids. Her research focuses on the legacy of British colonialism. HIV/AIDS in developing countries is also a research interest of Professor Bari's, and based on her preliminary interest in this, preliminary research in this area, she has written a report for USAID and the Centers for Disease Control entitled AIDS Prevention and Control in Tamil Nadu. Next to Professor Bari is Bea Holt of the Agnes Scott class of 1938. She received a BA from... And I have to tell you that when we were organizing this panel, the students on the committee had one request, but they said it very firmly. Bea Holt has to be on this panel. They were so excited to have Bea here. She graduated from Agnes Scott College, attended the University of North Carolina School of Law, and in 1941, when few women practiced law, received an LLB from the University of Alabama School of Law. She served in the House of Representatives of the North Carolina General Assembly from 1975 to 1994. She's been active in both state and church governments. She was the first woman member of the vestry of the Episcopal Church of the Holy Comforter, Burlington, North Carolina, has been active in diocese affairs. That's not right, but never mind. You know what I'm talking about. And was the first woman to serve on the Bishop's Advisory Committee in the Diocese of North Carolina. She has been honored by Agnes Scott as an outstanding alumna for service to the community and is recognized as a distinguished alumna at the University of North Carolina School of Law and the University of North Carolina. She also received the North Carolina Council of Churches Faith in Active Public Service Award. Next to her is a very special guest on our panel, Mindy Nazir, who is co-author of the book Slave. She was born into the Karkos tribe of Sudan, and her book details how she and 31 other children were captured in 1994 during an Arab raid on her village. Taken to Khartoum, Mindy was sold to a wealthy Arab family as a domestic slave. For the next 7 years, she lived in near isolation and grew up in unimaginable circumstances. In 2000, Mindy was sent to work for a Sudanese diplomat's family in London, and she escaped from slavery with the help of other Sudanese. Eventually, after much controversy, she was granted asylum and published her book to great acclaim, and she is now working on the second volume of her memoirs. Let's see. The next person is Trish Anderson of the Agnes Scott class of 1998. She is the program manager for the Atlanta Rotary Club's Centennial Project for Safe Water in Kenya. She received her bachelor's degree in sociology and anthropology from Agnes Scott and a master of public health from Emory University's Rollins School of Public Health. Trish has been involved in numerous projects designed to empower local communities and expand access to safe drinking water in Africa and Central America. She recently returned from a 2-year assignment in Western Kenya, where she guided the implementation of 2 community-based water programs focused on building the capacity for local women, many of whom are AIDS widows, to secure sustainable livelihoods through the selling and promotion of home-based water treatment products. In 2006, Trish developed this innovative water project, presented this innovative water project to the World Bank and received a Development Marketplace Award to expand the program. And finally, Loretta Ross of the class of 2007, and I want you to notice that we have 69 years of Agnes Scott women represented on this panel, which is really pretty phenomenal. Loretta Ross of the class of 2007 is the national coordinator of the Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Health Collective, a network founded in 1997 of 80 women of color and allied organizations that address reproductive justice issues. In 2004, Ms. Ross was national co-director of the April 25th, 2004 March for Women's Lives in Washington, D.C., the largest protest march in U.S. history with more than 1 million participants. As part of a 30-year history in social justice activism, between 1996 and 2004, she was the founder and executive director of the National Center for Human Rights Education in Atlanta, Georgia. She was one of the first African-American women to direct a rape crisis center in the 1970s. She's the author of Undivided Rights, Women of Color Organized for Reproductive Justice, and author of the Color of Choice chapter in Incite, Women of Color Against Violence, published in 2006. She's a graduate of Agnes Scott College. She'll receive her degree in May and holds an honorary doctorate of civil law degree from Arcadia University. And she's a wonderful example of our incredible Return to College Woodruff Scholar program and of the extraordinary wisdom and insight and strength we gain from these women who come and join our student body. And last but definitely not least, when our committee was discussing how to organize this panel, we were in absolute one accord about who should moderate this conversation. And I'm delighted to introduce to you Beth Hackett, who is Associate Professor of Women's Studies and Philosophy and Director of the Women's Studies program at Agnes Scott. In her teaching and research, she brings the methods of analytical philosophy to bear on questions in women's studies. She's particularly interested in theories of feminism, how axes of oppression intersect, and feminist legal theory. She is co-editor of Theories of Feminism, a reader, and has been a wonderful faculty leader with us here at Agnes Scott. So I'm going to turn it over to Beth Hackett, and I ask you to join me in welcoming our entire panel.
To moderate this panel and get a chance to begin to get to know these amazing women. Closer?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that better? Okay. I think that's better. Okay. So I thought that we would begin by simply going down the row here, and although we've heard an introduction about each of our panelists, to ask each of them to talk a little bit more in depth about the work that they do, and also to say a little bit about how they got to do that work, their journey to that work. So I think we'll start with that. So Deepika, would you mind?
I have read, studied, or taught literature for as long as I could read, and that's what I do. I teach literature at Emory. I live in the world of words. And to me, it seems the best way of all possible ways to relate to the rest of the world. Because when I was growing up in Calcutta, wondering what the rest of the world was like, I started reading very early. We didn't really have television in those days, thank goodness. Lucky me, I think. So we spent a lot of time outdoors playing with other children, and when we were at home, we were given lots of books to read. My parents were professors. And so what I did was I read. And I discovered very quickly that books could take me to the rest of the world very cheaply without ever leaving home. And they taught me that we've always lived in a bigger world than we can see, that better, other worlds have always been possible, and that it's possible to have relationships with people that you've never seen. And to me, this seemed the foundation of any kind of ethical system that my education since then has brought me to an understanding of, that you can relate to people who are not in your own purview or your own world, and that was the way in which you could develop a relationship with the world. So I've stayed with literature. I've thought there are many, many other things worth doing, but there's something that literature teaches us which carries over to so many other areas of activism, such as are represented by my wonderful, wonderful colleagues on this panel here. I feel like my love affair with literature would never die, because the lessons I've learned from it have sustained all sorts of inquiry, including my work now more recently with HIV/AIDS, particularly in India, particularly its devastating impact on women. And these are the lessons that I learned from literature, that people, places, worlds don't just exist, they have to be invented in one's mind. They have to be invented in the imagination. And that unless we want to live in a world and a reality invented by others, we had to learn to use our own imagination. That there can be no justice, no relationship with people different from ourselves, unless we learn how to imagine our way out of a world that has been so cynically imagined for us, sometimes by politicians, by exploitative development regimes, and others who are not able to show us that other better worlds are possible. I've also learned that those with the power of the pen have the power to change the world, one word, one book, one reader at a time. I've also learned that literature brings the world and history home to us in the way we can best relate to it, which is by turning history down to that scale of one, to that human scale that we can relate to. These are the lessons that sustain me daily in the classroom and sometimes even at home. And I'm thankful for books, and every time I leave a classroom, I'm grateful not only that I have a job, but that I have a job that I can believe in and something to communicate to my students. So that's what keeps me doing what it keeps me doing.
Thank you.
I'm known as B. Holt, and I have many challenges, as you can see from my age. As a matter of fact, I've had so many challenges, it's hard to pick out which one I should talk about. And I'll start with one which happened when I entered the 9th grade in Alabama. At that time, there was a law that said all girls had to take home economics and all boys could take biology. And I wanted to go to college, and so I tried to go. Finally, my father had to go to the school board to allow me to take biology. And at that time, I did not know what that self-imposed, externally imposed challenge I was going to encounter. At that time, science was taught by the coach. I was the only woman in the class, and they were all furious at me because at that point, the coach didn't care whether they taught science or not. And it didn't change until the Russians put up Sputnik, and they decided science teachers better teach science. And so at that point, they were all the boys there were furious, and the coach was furious. And so I knew that I would better study very hard, or I would be called on for the challenge of whether I could answer those questions or not. And of course, I did answer one question. It seems that one Casimir Funk thought about vitamins, and when I answered that question, everybody started calling me Funky. So from that time on, I learned that I better face challenges with some sort of humor. And I decided that's the best way I could do to combat stuff. And so from then on, I have found all kinds of things up until the time I went to law school. And one of my favorite professors later, when I went into taking criminal law, said to himself, "What is that fool woman coming up here to take law from Agnes Scott College. Girls said girls. I call it a woman's college. That's what it is. And he said, do you know that you are in the wrong place? You're taking criminal law, and told me about 10 minutes, well, it seemed as though it was a half an hour, that I should not be in that class. And he said, and now if you don't think you can cope with it, you may leave. Well, at that point, my knees had turned totally to water. And I couldn't have gotten up on my feet to walk out if I'd even wanted to. So I stayed there, and he would call on me with every case that he knew that he would. A woman should not be, at that point in time, should not be involved in. But we finally ended up with being great friends during the Equal Rights Amendment when I was in the legislature. So times can change. He also taught me a lot about what you can say in legally. He said, in making speeches, you can convince the jury that you know all about either the Bible or Shakespeare, because they won't know the difference when you quote it. There's a lot to be learned outside of schoolrooms. So anyway, I did decide to go on to law school, and my mother cried later because it turns out somebody, when I quoted that, said, I don't blame for crying because I've just been through a lawsuit, and I know that you do not need to go be a lawyer. Well, as it turned out, I have spent my legal career mostly making laws. So, but my mother said, I taught my daughters that they needed education, which of course they do. But she said, I overdid it with you. But I have loved every minute of getting the education. And in fact, at one point I thought I would love to be nothing but a total student the rest of my life. But it's been a fascinating thing. And of course, Agnes Scott just absolutely freed me to think, which is what I think education should do. And I love being on this panel and meeting these wonderful people.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Minde Nazar. So I was born in Kako, tribe in Sudan. When I was age 13 or 14 years, my village was attacked by Arab raiders, and then from there they took us. We were 13 or 14 girls and boys, had been taken by the raiders to a place called Al-Deleng. So from there they took us to Khartoum, where we were spent like 5 days with Arabic raiders who brought me to Khartoum. So in his place, I've been taken with a lady to her house, where I spent 7 years working for her. And she used to treat me very badly, and she beat me and she abused me. After I spent with her 7 years, she decided to send me to London to work to her sister, which is her husband, used to work in a Sudanese embassy. And I've been working with her like 3 months. So one day they decided to go back to Sudan, and they took me to their colleague house to stay there for a few days, for a few months until they come back from Sudan. So while I was there, the new family were really nice to me, and they helped me to go out with them and have fresh air and come back. But after that, before my master came back from Sudan, so I found another Sudanese exile in London to help me to escape. So in 2000, I escaped, so I stayed in London. So I stayed in London I stayed for London until London authorities granted me asylum. So I stayed in London. But what it made me to do this work was I started to No, before that, I introduced myself with a journalist whose name is Damien Lewis. So he's working in Sudan as a journalist. So he was really supportive, and he asked me if I can write a book with him. So it wasn't really easy for me to write a book with him. So I wasn't sure what that book it is. So he said, I will help you to write the book. So we wrote the book together. So that's one of the things my book has been published, and I started to talk out about what's happening to me in Sudan and what happened to the children who were captured with me. So, and I wasn't really planned to be a speaker and speak out about what happened in Sudan. So the circumstances made me to speak out and to talk about what's happening in Sudan. So that's why I've been talking about what happened, to have a voice for those who have no voice. That's the work I've been doing today.
Hi, my name is Trish Anderson. I work at the Center for Global Safe Water at Emory University. I began my work at the center about 3 years ago, immediately following my graduate studies at Rollins in global environmental health. I was drawn to the field of international development, particularly the water and sanitation piece of international development, by my passion for and interest in the interconnectedness between social justice and environmental justice, equity. Water and sanitation is about equity and gender equality, access to resources. This work has taken me to Central America, West Africa, East Africa. I just returned from 2 years in Kenya, where I had the opportunity to work with local experts, community members, and others on addressing communities' water and sanitation needs. And I consider these past 2 years as being a continuing part of my education, for sure. I definitely feel like I learned more than I was able to contribute in these last 2 years. My journey here has been a winding path. Looking back, I didn't necessarily know that I was headed towards this place, which is kind of exciting, but also it's been a bit nerve-wracking. But looking back, it makes sense. After I graduated high school, I did an international service learning trip in Kingston, Jamaica, which affected me more than I know. It has a lot to do with, I think, the choices I made. After graduating from Agnes Scott, I worked on urban environmental issues, working with urban communities to turn urban eyesores into green spaces and gardens, working with urban elementary school students, taking them from their indoor classrooms to their outdoor classrooms. I later worked as an advocate for Atlanta's homeless population, and also spent a couple years doing wilderness instruction for the Outward Bound School. And adding it all up, I realized that this was about, for me, this connection between social issues, whether it be poverty, education, violence, globalization, and our connection or lack of connection to the natural environment.
Okay, first of all, I want to say what an honor it is to be on this panel with all these women. This is just fabulous. I promised Beth that I would try to keep it clean, so I'm worked really hard on that, but that's not natural for me. First of all, how did I get on this journey? My mom tells a story. My mom and dad are passed now, but she told me a story once, and she told me that she used to take me with me when she used to clean houses for a living. And back then, black women were judged or selected for their jobs by how many scars they had on their knees. Because if you had scars on your knees, it proved that you cleaned floors on your knees. And my mother tells me that I was about 4 years old when I put my hands on my hips and said, I'm going to make my living with my brains. I'm not going to be like you. And I don't remember saying it, but I can believe it knowing myself. But that's been my passion, I guess, to live up to her legacy and what my father was able to give me and to do better. And so I'm kind of, why people ask me why in my life, 50-something, am I going back to college? And I'm like, because I told my mama I would, So that's kind of part of my journey. Part of what set my path, my feet on the path that I'm on now, though, was that in the 1960s, I got pregnant when I was in high school. And it was very common back then to expel girls from being pregnant. I don't know if any of you remember those days, but the forces that be kind of decided we were the ones that didn't need the education, even though we were parenting at the time. And so my parents and I had to sue my school system for my right to return to school after I had my baby, which was a little bit bizarre because the girls who went off and secretly gave their babies up for adoption or had an abortion to hide the pregnancy, they got readmitted to school with no problem. It was those of us that chose to keep our children and had visible proof that we were fallen angels that got kicked out. And so because I chose to keep my son, we had to fight for my right to stay in school, and we ended up suing my school system. We won that lawsuit. And at 15, the age I was, I actually learned that it's possible to take on a very powerful institution and win. And I've believed that all of my life because of my parents and what they were able to offer me. Because my father never graduated from high school. I told you about Mom. But they were committed that their 8 children would go to college. They were just absolutely committed to that, and they saw me being kicked out of high school as a stumbling block. Now, I self-sabotaged my education because when I first went to college, I majored in chemistry and physics. Bad mistake. When you're trying to actively parent at 16 and deal with other choices. And so I wasn't a successful college student my first time around. And then I just started doing political work, actually addressing issues like Beth would call the plumbing issues. Because what had happened to me as a teenager with the teen pregnancy, I also suffered sterilization abuse when I was sterilized when I was 23. So that kind of led my feet onto the path of working for women's rights, even though I thought I was going to be a chemist in a laboratory somewhere, but the plumbing kept getting in the way. And so I worked in the women's movement for more than 30 years now, and then I actually came to lecture at Agnes Scott College in 1998. Dr. Isa Williams, is Isa here? I don't know if she's here. Hey, Isa! Perennially has me come lecture at her Women in Leadership seminar. And Isa kind of casually asked the question one day, well, Loretta, with all that you've done in your life, what haven't you done that you ever wanted to do? And I said, get a college education. And I have to honestly say that she and Tina Pippin and folks at Agnes Scott formed this circle of sisterhood that supported me because I was afraid to fill out the application. I had bombed out the first time. I didn't know if I could do this. And so it's the support system at Agnes Scott that I just have to give great awards to because for women like me, we don't get to fulfill our dreams if we don't have sisters who help us along the way. And so I'll ever be forever grateful for Agnes Scott, and I'm probably your best unpaid recruiter because I'm telling every young girl I meet about Agnes Scott. In terms of challenges, and I know this is one of our other questions, I think our challenges are many, but our biggest challenge is failure to believe that we can do anything that we want to. Even though I've been a professional feminist and that's been my mantra, it's been another thing to actually believe it inside my heart. Yeah, and so unlearning those decades of oppression, self-oppression in many kind of ways, and self-doubt and lack of belief that anything is possible if you're determined enough, that's the greatest challenge that I see happening for me and for the women that I work with. And thank you, Agnes Scott, for letting a loudmouth radical like me up here.
And then the most pressing global issues, what would you identify as those? And perhaps we could start here and make our way down again, if that's okay.
Well, I think I would probably echo Loretta in saying I think the greatest challenge for women, probably just about everyone, is to overcome other people's idea of who you are and what you should be. It's other people's imagination of what a woman's life should be like, or whether or not she should have a serious career, or what combination, what's the ratio between a private and public self for the woman. Those are the big issues, overcoming sometimes not what other people think about you, but what you think about yourself. I mean, there's an enemy within that can keep you down, and that may be the biggest challenge yet. I often think of Eleanor Roosevelt saying, remember, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. So you've got to be a partner in your own. You are, in some ways. One is one's own biggest challenge. There is that. And as far as global scale of challenge, which I see very differently, which may not be such a private matter, is how do we relate to the world outside ourselves? It's just not knowing enough, or letting some people represent the world to us in ways that are obviously prejudicial, partial, and calculated to prevent us from knowing the world better, more ethically, in more personal ways. So a lack of global literacy, meaningful, critical global literacy, I think, may be the challenge. We're seeing all sorts of manifestations of that. I won't talk about the obvious. I'm sure all this is streaming through your mind as I speak.
Well, I agree that first thing we have to do, and I've been standing up and speaking up to women for a long time. Actually, I went through 2 sessions of the Equal Rights Amendment that came through the North Carolina legislature, and if we had passed it, it would be part of our Constitution, but we couldn't. But in doing that, I faced 2 groups of women that I could not believe that I could not get through to them. One of them, in each one of those groups of women, were the ones that needed it the most. Number one, school teachers. They could not be convinced that they could go into the voting booth and vote without somebody in the educational, whatever, over power structure would know what they were doing. The next group were the nurses. Of all the medical professions, the nurses were doing the hardest work and being next to their patients, closer, and understanding them, and doing a wonderful job. And one of my sisters was a nurse, and I had to convince her that the doctor didn't go in the voting booth with her. She could vote any way she wanted, and nobody would know. But those groups that I would speak to as groups could not believe that one could make a difference, and that they should take it from there. There was so much needed in those groups, and so much service, and so much necessary service, and they could not as a group bond themselves together to work for the advancement of women. The next thing is that I think we've got to face the global challenge that I'm seeing today. As you can see, I still can't get my nose out of politics. But the problems we're facing with immigration. So that's one thing that I see that we've got to do things. I think one thing that we must do is try to face our prejudices that seem to be built in some way, particularly in the South, but all over. And I like to say, if we go back to some of the comic strips in Linus, his sister was saying, what are you going to do about your blanket and when you go off to college? And he said, maybe make it into a sport coat. Well, I think part of that is blankets represent our prejudices, and we must sort of face up to them, and that's why I think education is so necessary, both for the challenges today for our young people here and for the global problems. Because one thing that we have to think about is that before we can go real global, we've got to settle some of our things locally. And I think, of course, education touches both of those problems. And so we must face the education even with our self-esteem, as you were saying.
I think the greatest challenge facing women today, especially back home, I will say the survival. I think every minute children die and so much suffering going on back home. I think basically I'm talking about what happened where I come from. So basically the survival, I think the survival is the most important thing. This is for me the challenging, or this is what's facing women today. So many children die and so many suffering going on back their home. I think, and the education is most importantly. I think education is very powerful. If you have not much education, you can do nothing, especially women in Sudan are not given any opportunity about doing anything. Most of the time, men are doing things, so education for women are the most important things, I think. Yeah.
As I thought about these questions, I realized that I was functioning in the context of these last 2 years' experience I had working and living in a developing country. And it's women's greatest challenges have been and continue to be equity issues. Water is an equity issue for women. Women carry the burden. Women and girls are left out of going to school because of this, and they're carrying on all the other burdens of a household and their communities. But in this, I think that women's greatest successes are seen, and that is, it's kind of cliche, but it's their ability to rise above and do what has to be done. And I was reminded of this in Kenya, working in rural villages with women who are mostly the grandmothers, unfortunately, because their sons and daughters dying of AIDS, and they're taking care of their grandchildren and orphans and the sick in their community, and yet they're also taking on roles as the change agents in their communities, through our water project or other similar projects, because they know things don't have to be the way they are, and they're not accepting them as the way they are. But they have their hands full, but they're rising above, and it's truly an inspiration. And for me, the pressing issue of the day globally is poverty. In poverty, especially in extreme poverty, people are left out of the opportunity to better their own lives, better their world around them. I think if all nations together focused on just getting some of the basic rights, being education, health care, opportunity to provide for your family, got those met for the almost half the world's population that lives under $2 a day, I think we'd make some great strides in stamping out some of the extremism and violence and fear that seems to have pervaded our world today.
Well, as a social justice activist, I spend my entire life looking at America's problems. I kind of call it looking at the vomit. So it's hard to filter out one. I know I have a way with words, but they aren't the prettiest ones. Couple of things come to mind. Obviously, the biggest global problem we have is the predilection for using war and violence as a way of solving conflicts right now. I mean, this endless war on terrorism that's sucking up not only the U.S. resources, but resources around the world that prevents us from addressing issues of poverty and enslavement and stuff like that. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. So that's the macro picture that I see. But more specifically, I'm looking at the devaluation of women that is a constant in our society, whether it's from Don Imus to the Supreme Court decision 2 days ago. It's like, when do women get recognized as full human beings capable of making the decisions they need to make about their lives, about their bodies, without some bunch of boys deciding that they know best for us? And enough is enough now. We shouldn't have to campaign to get Don Imus fired from his job. He shouldn't have said it in the first place. He shouldn't have thought it in the first place. At what point are we as a society going to evolve enough to be deserving of the riches and the wealth and the privileges that we have? And we just haven't gotten there yet. And so I see the larger challenge of global geopolitics, but the more immediate challenge of how do women finally get equality in our society. I was involved in the ERA campaign in the 1970s when we tried to get an equal rights amendment to our Constitution. And if we had that amendment saying that women are full citizens of this country and deserve equal rights, then we wouldn't have had the Supreme Court decision 2 days ago saying that we don't. And so the struggle is endless and continuous, and I'm glad new generations are coming up because I'm ready to retire.
Okay, so I'm going to list some of the things that have been identified, but of course what I'm going to ask next is how do we solve them? Okay, so just get ready for that small question. All right. So some of the things that were mentioned were issues around equity, put in terms of whether we're thinking about the ERA, devaluation of women in general, or as it was put by Trish, equity itself. Then we had access to education, and things like poverty and basic survival being identified as issues both for women and globally. The use of war and violence as so-called solutions to some of these problems, and access to education, as well as women overcoming internalized messages that get in our way in terms of our abilities. So just that small slate of issues, if you could, no, but seriously, if you could identify approaches to some of these issues that you think are effective, or if you know of particular people who are engaged in particular work that you think is particularly effective, if you could talk about that a little bit. And I'm kidding, obviously you don't have to address all of those things, but just the strategies that you think are effective at addressing at least some of these issues that we've identified.
That's a long list of problems and a huge problems. And to me, what's interesting is that the responses that are most inspiring are the small, individual, singular, not even large movement responses, which are obviously important. But I'm always inspired by women very often in India, similar to what Trish is describing in her experience in Kenya. Women who refuse to be blinded or paralyzed by the size of the problem. These problems are big and many, and they tend to focus, they have an asset-based mindset. They tend to figure out how to solve the problem, and they do it on a daily basis with hardly any training, no special access to resources, in fact scarce resources, whether it's food or water, and somehow you'll find these sort of positive deviants in every little society who are doing things. They're feeding their children creatively in the absence of, full-scale availability of nutrient-rich diet, for instance. They'll pick out the shrimp that's in the water. No other woman is doing it, 3 or 4 are doing it. Or they're feeding their children 4 or 5 times a day with the same amount of rice that other women are feeding, twice or thrice a day. Or they're actively feeding and making sure that every kernel goes into the baby's mouth, and their babies are healthier. And that's what inspires me, that these are people who will not sort of complain about how big the problem is, and it is, and other people, and they should be doing more about it, but they find ways around it. And that's a small-scale survival skill that we could learn from all of these societies that have employed sustainable ecological practices for a very, very long time, saving little scraps of this and that, and they manage. And there are these bigger problems, obviously, and long lists of problems. Whatever else is going on, we ought to recognize those efforts and see how solution-based minds produce innovative solutions in the middle of what looks like a hopeless sort of situation.
Well, I have said for a long time that the Equal Rights Amendment is part of our unfinished agenda for women. It is. Until we get that, who knows which way the courts will take us, because for ages the Supreme Court, we needed it because the Supreme Court would not take issues that had to do with women's rights. They thought that women needed to be protected or whatever, and they did not consider those cases that involved women's rights. And that, of course, is a widespread problem. We can go backwards any time because we've been left out of the Constitution, and we will still be in that spot forever until we get it back in, or at least that has to do with all of these things, with poverty for women, with equity for salaries, for equity for everything. And it's just one of those things that we have to work to and face to. I don't know anything better to work towards the help for women than education. If you educate a woman, you educated the whole family, and that includes this country as well as every other country. And it also means a higher standard of living, and I agree with you. Number one, we have to convince the women of this country that we don't need to settle problems by violence. And when they glorify and accept that their sons are going to go fight in a war that seems to settle nothing, I think we've got to go back to what the Bible, in one of my favorite quotes, says, "Come, let us reason together." That's what we must learn to do instead of marching out to war, and settle down to educating everybody, including mostly the women.
Mindy, is there anything else to add in terms of solutions?
Yeah, I think addressing these challenges would be like the best way is to approach the media. I think the media is the best way you can really spread all the issues, and also campaign, and also writing letters to, I don't know, to the government, to the people to the high position. I think that's the best way to really to address the issues. I think the media is the best way to address the issues for me, I think, and the campaign. That's what I think.
Yeah, I would second what's been said. Research has shown that education will do more for ending the cycle of poverty and helping folks help themselves than any other intervention, whether it's, we're talking about in the U.S. or in developing countries. We live in an abundant world of intellectual resources, natural resources, financial. It's the allocation that we get messed up with sometimes, and I blame leadership at times for that. I think the money that we've spent each year on weapons is enough to send every child in the world to school, but we don't do it. Actually, it's a very small fraction of what we spend on weapons would send every child to school. We need to make it a priority, and I think enacting the solutions that we have come to find to be effective, and voting for the people who will do it.
I think I have to just say ditto around the education question, but not education simply for education's sake, but in the Paulo Freire model, education for social change, so that you're not just educated to participate in the system, you're educated to change the system. That's actually one of the things that distinguishes my education here at Agnes Scott from the early education I got at Howard University, where at Howard I was taught to participate in the system. At Agnes Scott, I was given a sense that I could change and possibly own the system if I wanted to. And it makes a difference. It really does make a difference. I mean, we complain about how many books we have to read a semester and how rigorous the stuff is, and it feels like boot camp and all these other things, but those challenges convince you can do your best. And so I think the strategy is education, but education for social change. But I also want to say some of my best learning was not in the classroom at Agnes Scott. Because I was an older Woodruff scholar and I could relate to the women in the cafeteria, they became my cheering squad. And so every day I went to get my lunch, they would ask me how I was doing, and it was like I began to represent their hopes for going back to school and stuff. And so it was their support and the fact that you see beyond the classroom, you see all the details of this campus and what a wonderful fishbowl opportunity it is to cross classes and to cross races and to mix up everybody and see how we can create a better world together. Really is what's special. I'm not here to just do a paean to Agnes Scott, but this is my lived experience. But the other thing I wanted to say is that what I have learned about women and fundamentally believe is that our greatest gift to the world is our capacity to bring people together across difference. And we have not used that enough. We've actually let men too often set the boundaries of our lives, who we can meet with, who we can work with. We can't send our children to school with those children because they're different, that kind of thing. And we've just got to use our natural capacity for viral networking and break down all of those barriers. We can bring them together in our churches. We can bring them together across the dinner table. We can bring them together at our children's schools. We really need to use our power to bring people together across differences to really change this world. And if we took that on as our mission, well, like my mama used to say, why would I want to be equal to men when I've been better than them all of my life?
Okay, following up on that, but seriously, I guess I wanted to ask, and maybe we'll start with Trish, if it's okay. Come back down this way. Maybe your thoughts on the sort of thing that the reader was suggesting. I mean, do you think there is a distinctive role that women can play or should be playing to address the kinds of issues that we've been talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yes and no. I mean, I think that human beings have obligation to do what's right, to make ethical decisions. You know, like it or not, we're all connected on this planet. Diseases don't know boundaries. We're sharing the same resources. But I think that women, like Loretta was saying, we do have this capacity to bring people together, and we do need to use that strength. And, you know, not accept status quo, to be leaders for next generations of girls and women. So, yeah.
Okay. What about the other three? Do you think there's a distinctive role for women to be playing in addressing these issues? Yeah.
I think so.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
As a matter of fact, if you've got a house full of children, you've got to learn how to keep them apart. You learn at the grassroots. However, I've noticed from the change that women made in everything that I've been involved in from the time I went into that biology class. It did change things, just one woman. One woman changed the way people thought when I got on the bishop's diocesan advisory thing, and they started out every meeting, the minister that was president of that board start off saying, "Gentlemen and Mrs. Holt." Like, what in the world are you doing here? Well, I'll tell you, we did change the whole agenda. I did change because they had to accept it, that even though I was there and had a law degree and like other members of the committee, I still had a different opinion. I also changed by being one woman in committees in the legislature. It changed, and the more women that came, the more we widened the aspect of things that would happen to families, not just women, but to whole families. It would really do a difference to a family, whatever laws we passed. So that one woman at a time, and the more women. And what we need now, to tell you the truth, we're being run by corporations, or we just are. And you can see it, the corporations are really running the wartime effort, it seems to me. But we need more women on boards, corporate boards. And that, as we've analyzed it, a bunch of the women's forum that I'm in, and decided that that's what we are going to try to do. Get more women in points of power that can get on boards that make decisions for us all the time now. And that's one thing that you can concentrate on if you can mentor a woman that finishes Agnes Scott and is going into the corporate world, aim for getting on the board. Basically.
Well, I would say that what women have to contribute distinctively as a response is to become real women. Real women, I don't think there's anything inherently nobler about women. Just because they often suffer more, are poorer, doesn't necessarily ennoble them. But we should find ways in which women should ennoble themselves. They should become aware of how our privilege, our lifestyle may be sustained by the exploitation, labor, poverty of other women and men. I don't think one should capitalize on being a woman as a necessarily available higher ground for anything. I think women should seek that higher ground. All human beings should. But if women believe or even talk about feminism or a global feminism, and I think women should, they should take the responsibility, not only for themselves and their own self-empowerment, but those of others. I think what women may have as a slight edge over men is a relational sense of self, but to develop that and to earn that moniker of a real woman, to become real women who care not only about themselves and their lives, but about others.
Would you mind saying a little bit more what you mean by relational sense of self?
Very often, very essentially speaking, in social roles, women are have for a long time been dismissed as not worthy in their own right, but as, wives, mothers, daughters, and so on. That's very often how women are seen, and that's something that can become an asset for women. That I think women tend to, not all women do, but women often tend to seek the company of others. Women like being with others, they seek consensus, they try to bring people together, as Loretta was saying, Tricia was echoing this as well. I think we like to be with other people, and that may be something we have that we can grow positively, not just for our own small special interest groups, but much more broadly.
I would add that there's a challenge here in that men and women can do the same thing. I think that societal norms, culture perceives men and women's effectiveness differently often, and so what happens sometimes is women who take on positions of leadership, whether in corporations or politics, may adopt the style that's seen as more effective, which is often more masculine style, which is appropriate at times. But also it's at the expense of bringing something different, a diversity in leadership to a place that needs that more feminine type of leadership, the relational kind, the democratic style. So I think there's a challenge in this.
Mindy, is there anything you'd like to add about that you think women have that's distinctive to bring to it? And not, that's good. Okay, good.
Well, I'm so delighted that since my era, that we're having the education, the Year Abroad program. There's no way to educate people about problems of other people, not just women, but other people, than seeing it and meeting the people on their rounds. And this thing is just wonderful to me to see people that are going to study abroad and learn about people. Another thing is the languages that you are teaching people, because I look at what's happening to us with the intelligence community in Iraq when we don't have enough translators and we're having people killed because our people don't understand our language. And that's one way to get to people and understand their problems and understand not only their problems but their traditions and their meaningful parts of their religion. So part of this is the language barrier that we face, and of course you're addressing it here, and the global, the study abroad program, and also the bringing people in to be your fellow students. And that helps to know people. There's no way to break down barriers better than just knowing people on a person-to-person basis. And that can be overcome with education and with just being with other people. One-to-one people can certainly take away a lot of the prejudices that we have with xenophobia these days.
Okay. Did Coach like to add anything?
Obviously, quite agree completely. Read, travel, learn other languages. But in terms of what today's education should look like, also to echo Loretta, education, social change, but not to have this blind faith in education, not to get cynical as an educator myself, but to understand that obviously education is not value-free. To become self-conscious as educators, that we are part of a system. Education can be a process of alienation and exclusion. It can separate us from our communities, separate, rich from poor, more privileged, those with more or less access. So to understand that education also takes place within that kind of world, there's a hierarchy of institutions, there's all of that. And I don't know how easy it is for us as educators, because we obviously believe in education, to also become very self-conscious, to make sure there's a healthy degree of suspicion about the role of education in the world, in possibly bolstering some of the power structures that we think we would like to fight.
And I think with one of the things in encouraging the education of women, one of the Millennium goals is to educate women up to the primary grades. We need to take it on further into secondary and further education. We can't just stop with just learning how to read the letters. We've got to learn how those sentences have meaning.
I think education is the most powerful thing because by saying that, according to my experience, so the people who are educated, especially the men back home, they think they have to do the outside work, and women who has not enough education, they want them to do the domestic work at home. So basically, education for women, I think, is very important, and I think the education is equality between men and women. All has to be really educated. So I think the education is the most powerful thing, and in my case, I think women should be educated more than men because that's not happening back home in my country.
I mean, I think we're talking about education here in terms of the institution, schools, and things like that, but our education is also from our families and travel. And, our institutions, I think it's important that they continue to provide us the skills that we need to go out into the world and take care of ourselves, and also the ability to be critical thinkers and have a healthy bit of skepticism about things. But I also think schools and every other place where we learn, we need to make sure that we're becoming compassionate citizens as well. I think without that piece of compassion, we may not always do the right things with these skills that we've earned.
First of all, I have very specific fields I'd like to see more women get education in. I'm a devotee, and y'all know that I love to teach people what their human rights are. The field of human rights education has yet to be populated. We need human rights education out there so that people have the capacity to defend their human rights. But you can't defend human rights of which you're unaware. You just can't. And so that's one specific field I'd like to see more education in. I'd also like to see more women educated in foreign policy. There simply aren't enough women at the table, and I'm leaving Condoleezza Rice off the table for a minute because I'm not sure she represents my values. But we need more women who aren't going to become, dress-wearing representatives of men, but actually speak up for themselves and speak about a new and different world that we have to develop through diplomatic relationships and not military relationships. And there aren't enough women with, in my mind, our value system sitting at those foreign policy tables. And so don't take the language so you can become the translator at the meeting, but the chair at the meeting. And we need to change that whole orientation. But one thing I want to echo that other people said is something that, Tina, are you here, Tina Piffin? I don't know if Tina's here today, but Tina said something in one of her religion classes to me. He says, part of our problem as Americans is that we are very, very adept at protesting our pain, but we're much less adept at protesting our privileges gained at other people's expenses. And so we need to really receive an education that makes us accountable for the fact that those blouses are so cheap at Walmart and why. That makes us accountable for the fact that an SUV being sold to us for safety is really triggering or fueling the war that's causing so many people to die. You know, education in a vacuum does not make us capable of protesting our privileges with any authenticity and with any real commitment to making a difference in the world. Mainly we're being educated just to get our share and make sure nobody else takes it away from us. And we really need a different type of education about being a responsible global citizen in a way that we get up every day joyful about our lives instead of guilty about our privileges.
Okay, I have one more question for the panel, and then I was hoping we could open it up to questions from the floor, so you can be thinking about your questions, and we have mics in the aisle. But the last question I have is just if you have any advice. I'm thinking about each of you has chosen to do very difficult work and seem to be doing it, not only doing it well, but doing it happily. And so I guess the question that I have is, what advice do you have for others who might wish to take on this kind of challenging work? Do you mind going first?
I actually don't think of my work as particularly challenging because I enjoy it greatly. I don't think of the challenges, and it's probably because I have a lot of fun with it, and the only advice I would have is for people to have a sense of humor about whatever they're doing, teaching or activism or whatever. Have a sense of humor and have fun. A lot of the problems of the world are solved probably more easily by not taking them so seriously, taking them playfully, getting creative about them, thinking small, not huge all the time. So just having a lot of fun, whatever you're doing.
Well, I totally agree that you have to have a sense of humor to avoid any stress. I mean, that certainly is a stress reliever to see things in a humorous light at times, especially if you're going to be in a general assembly with people from all over just because people liked them and put them there. But it's been fun. Now, I chose to go into a challenging thing because I wanted to. I loved it. I thought it was a great way to settle all kinds of issues. And people ask me, why are you in that thing like you're doing? It seems like you'd be real stressed out. Well, I was not stressed out because I loved every minute of what I was doing. I even liked campaigning, but I would have liked it a whole lot more if I'd known whether I was going to win or lose. But I still enjoyed it, and I totally enjoyed the work that I was doing. I didn't just stop with campaigning. I enjoyed every minute of the work that I was doing in every committee and just looked forward to every day. And that was something that would keep you from being stressed out if you loved what you were doing. And that applies to any phase of anything you go into. You certainly will live longer, and if you like what you're doing. And I certainly think, pick something that you like. It's like the guy that said, that he was teaching, and he said, he was terrible teaching. I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, well, I really wanted to be a lawyer. And he says, you're 30 years old. Why don't you go into law school and being a lawyer? And he said, well, it would take 3 more years. And he said, in 3 more years, you'll suffer through teaching, and in 3 more years, you'll be a lawyer. Well, it takes more than 3 more years, but still, it would be a law degree. So if you don't like what you're doing, there's no reason that you can't stop and find something that you really love doing. Look forward to every day getting up to the challenges of what you're facing that day, and hoping that you can meet them.
I consider the work I'm doing is a big challenge for me. I wasn't really chosen to be a speaker, to speak out. I think the circumstances, it made me to speak out. And I'm determined that to speak out, I think I have an issue and I have a duty towards what I'm doing. By saying that, I would advise that to do the sort of work I'm doing, it wasn't my plan to do it. The circumstances made me to go for it and to stand up, to speak to those who have no voice. And this is, I think, is my duty. And the challenge is the Sudan government doesn't want me to speak out. I'm going against what they don't want me to do. So it's a big challenge for me. And sometimes I feel like I am doing something that's really bigger than me. So,
Yep, my answer was to find the good. You know, when you're working in developing countries and places where there's a lot of despair, it's you got to find the good, and it's people like Mindy. You know, it's meeting those people, hearing their stories, seeing what they do, changing my own attitude, stop complaining. You know, it's seeing the good, because that's what inspires us.
Stop complaining. Is that good?
My first work in social justice was at a rape crisis center. And I have to honestly say, since it was the first rape crisis center, but I was in a major long-term relationship with my ex. And I used to come home from work so like the VA person walking crooked, because every time I saw a man, I would flinch. Not because of what was happening to me personally, but because of all the stories and the stuff that was bombarding me. And I have to honestly say, I have to give credit to Ernest Patterson, who once told me, he said, Loretta, being a rapist should really suck. Fighting them should be fun. And it was like a little quip on my work, but it really did put things in perspective for me. To not take myself or the work that seriously, that I was losing the joy in life and the joy in the relationship, and not appreciating that most people out here don't violate each other, don't brutalize each other. It's just my field has me looking at the worst of the worst, and not to have that color my whole perspective. And in my career, I've worked on reproductive rights, which always gets body blows from the Supreme Court, it seems. I fought the Ku Klux Klan, and I've learned to become friends with Klansmen and Nazis and stuff, and I've done human rights work, and now I do women's rights work again. And what I find in all of it is that there is a lot of joy in serving others. I just can't put that any more plainly. A lot of people think that when you join social justice movements, and especially a lot of young people, they think it's like an opportunity to be leadership, like they're ascending to a throne or something. And I bet you President Keisha's going to find out, knows already. the opportunity, leadership is the opportunity to serve at the best of your ability. And once you do that, you will have all the joy in the world you'd ever ask for in life. I tell a lot of young people, without intending it, I joined the women's movement. I've seen 40 or 50 countries. I've made so many friends in so many different places, and I've really seen the unity of the world. And I've learned to have very positive, wonderful conversations with people totally unlike me, like a member of the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, you cannot imagine how wonderfully exciting it is to be able to make a difference in the world and to take on these challenges, but take them on from a sense of joy. And the last thing I'll say about this one anyway, because I'm a talker, is that once I began doing human rights work, which happened in 1996, that's when I began to transform, because up until then I'd done all of my social justice work from a sense of anger at the harm people do to each other. I was just absolutely on a boil about what men did to women, what people did to each other, what racists did to people. I was just furious. And once I learned about the human rights framework and began to appreciate that the people who I was opposing had the same human rights I had to defend, then I had to learn to recenter my purpose for doing the work from a place of love, which was not easy, because I've known Martin Luther King, and I'm not a turn the other cheek kind of girl. But once I understood that intellectually, then I began to appreciate it emotionally, and I kept repeating it over and over to myself till I actually started believing it. And now I know I do it from a place of love, but it wasn't always there. It was a learning process, too. And that's also much more sustainable than anger. You can do it for the rest of your life when you do it from a sense of love. If you do it from a sense of anger, the anger will eat you up before it ever reaches the person you're mad at.
Yeah. I actually don't know why I moved over here, but I wanted to open the floor for questions for more of these pearls of wisdom I hope will be elicited. Yes?
Hello. Thank you all for being here, first of all. I am Susan Holliday, class of 2006 here at Agnes. I am absolutely thrilled by each of your stories. You are individually so inspiring, and collectively you are awe-inspiring. Please help me thank them again for being here. Somebody sent me an email recently that said, and I have to paraphrase because my memory's gone after going through Agnes Scott at this late stage in my life, but it was something about peace is not merely the absence of war, but is the co-creation of humans standing together to create a world of harmony. Something like that. And because you've mentioned that we women many times identify ourselves as the relationships around us, I want to ask a question related to my grand perfects. I have 2-year-old Dylan and the pictures to prove it. And I have a delightful 4-year-old Natalie, who I've already asked for a place in the class of 2025, I think it is, here at Agnes. What one thing can I as an individual do? I'm so overwhelmed by your lives. What can I do as an individual to help them not be socialized in the way that I was and my foremothers were? How can I help them to co-create a world where we stand together to create?
Oh, dear. That's a pretty tough
I had
question.
the joy a couple of weekends ago of holding my great-grandson. And, yeah, that'll probably be the only great-grandmother walking the stage in 07. That'll be another trip. But anyway, and that question does preoccupy my mind. I know that when I parented my son, I parented him without war toys in a very intentional way, even though, there wasn't a lot of support for doing that back then. It made a difference so that when he started having relationships and entering dating with people, when he encountered a woman who was more accustomed to violence than he was, he ran because he knew better that he couldn't bring her home to mama, because we didn't have a violent home. Nothing I gave him equipped him to deal with violence. And so, his son, and then on and on. And so it's amazing how the little things you can do can make such an incredible difference. And so teach your grandchildren how to be in this world without violence, and you will have made one of those rippling things where you drop the stone in and it just ripples out. You never know what it's going to produce, but you will have made a big, big difference. Now I'm looking at my two energetic great-grandsons saying, I'm going to have to figure out how to parent you without violence, and I can't even keep hold of you quick enough to catch up to you, bouncing all over the walls and stuff. So you do what you can do.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask about public health education. My nanny is from South Africa, and I've had many conversations with her about public health because she lost relatives to TB and then found out that she had been exposed to TB and that our family had been exposed to TB. And learning how little she knew about that it was curable, that there were things you could do. And then I had a recent conversation with her after another visit home and someone passed away from AIDS, how they're preventing AIDS. How is AIDS prevented in African countries, and how do they learn about this prevention? She mentioned to me that douching was what they thought prevented AIDS. And I just wanted to take her and help her spread the word that no, that's not how it happens. How do we, one at a time is what I feel like I'm doing right now, but how do we do it on a global scale?
Yeah, it starts with the one at a time. I mean, that's how the bad rumors and the gossip start. And so, our work in Kenya is working with local women's groups. We train them with, give them information and also the ability to buy products and go sell. But it's what they do that's the most powerful part of the role, is that they are the behavior change agents. They're the ones going back and talking about everything from how to prevent AIDS to how to treat your water. So there's not a good answer for how do you do it on a global scale. This is something we've got to do community by community.
So when you meet these au pairs and nannies that are in your country, educate them, because they don't always know themselves even.
Yeah.
The other thing I might add to that, having done a little work on HIV/AIDS in particular, is to see these sorts of epidemics as syndemic issues that are involved with a whole set of other issues of poverty and so on. Sometimes it's not just a matter of knowing the better behavior. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's lack of education. Sometimes the choices are Hobson's choices, right? Sex work, for instance, when you know your child is crying for milk and there doesn't appear to be another option. So those are poverty and other sorts of issues. So more holistic sense. If you're thinking global, we also think holistically, and so this is all eventually tied up.
So she's tied to the local community in South Africa, and she mentioned to me that they're not seen as a poverty-stricken country, that they're seen as a developed country. They're not.
There's plenty of poverty in South Africa.
But
There's plenty of poverty right here.
I agree with you, but she said they weren't eligible for some of the funding that goes with AIDS that goes to the underdeveloped countries, that South Africa gets left out there because they're seen as such a developed country.
That's interesting.
Can I offer a specific resource? One of Sister Song's agencies, Sister Love, here in Atlanta, with the Women's AIDS Project, just opened up their offices a couple of years ago in Johannesburg, and they are making a lot of resources available for very needy, very impoverished women in South Africa. And their website is www.sisterlove.org. And they're working in Cape Town, Durban, Joburg, and a lot of the rural areas, Umtata. They're working in a lot of the regions of South Africa. And they are networked with all the South African HIV/AIDS service organizations that are serving women. And so www.sisterlove.org.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline DiCarlo, class of 87. Thank you very much. I'm so proud to be part of Agnes Scott when I get to hear the wisdom and knowledge of folks like you. Since many of us are alums, I was wondering if, and this might fall to Loretta, but maybe others, when we talk about privilege and duty, if we could get an update on how things are going with our living wage campaign here at Agnes Scott, so the people that work in our service industries are fairly compensated for the work that they've been doing, and do a little public service announcement that there's a call-in day, maybe Monday. President Keisha's first day on the job officially. You could call her and congratulate her and check on that.
You need to answer that one.
Hang on 1 second. Okay. Yeah.
Jacqueline, where'd you go? There you are, okay. Thanks for the question, and I'm really glad you didn't ask about fair trade, because I wouldn't be able to answer that. I know there's been progress made on fair trade, but I can give you an answer on the living wage. And it's a two-part answer. We have our budget convocation, which is it happens twice, and it's when Vice President for Business and Finance, John Hagman, does a kind of full report on the budget for next year. And we will be able to announce, we actually are still in the process of number crunching, which is why I can't give you the exact figure, but there will be a living wage supplement for all employees of Agnes Scott who earn, I believe it's going to be under $30,000. So there will be a living wage supplement. It won't get us all the way there. I don't want to, I don't want to, suggest that this is going to lead us to where the living wage campaign wants us to be, but it does move us, in the right direction. And our plan then this summer is to develop a long-range living wage plan, including really an opportunity to sit down and try to figure out what should the index be. We've had a number of really interesting and well-researched reports, both from the Living Wage Campaign and from others. There's some national organizations out there that suggest indexing living wage to ambient housing prices and to HUD data, and we really need to take a look at all of that and also look at what are the salary compression issues that we would also need to address. And what my hope is that by the fall, and the plan is that at the fall board meeting we can propose a long-range plan, which again is likely to be incremental, just given how tight our budgets are, but at least would move us in a kind of clearer way over several years towards a kind of way of defining a living wage at Agnes Scott and moving us in that direction. So some immediate progress that we'll be very happy to announce next Wednesday, and then more progress to come.
Okay, thank you.
Really difficult to do, and I'm wondering that in your work, what is it that you've experienced that's giving you hope about the situation of the world?
I'm with you. It's very overwhelming, and I'd be lying if I said that I was able to see the good every day, because it's definitely hard to do. What gives me hope is that I see change, and and again, I have to go to the local level and find my inspiration there and see change happening on the local level. And as more people, gain access to their rights and are educated and can, stand up and represent their communities and take that to their leaders, and then leaders start changing, and then they start speaking up for, being treated right in the world, and, it's that ripple effect. And so it's the individual contact I have with the good things happening on the ground, because there's a lot of good things happening on the ground. Unfortunately, we don't hear about it on CNN, but there is.
Would anyone else on the panel like to comment about what gives you hope?
I can't anything because it's still what is going on in Sudan, like therefore the genocide is still going on there. I still feel like I don't see any progress or anything going on. So.
I have a question speaking from, I guess, a bunch of completely overwhelmed current students at Agnes Scott. I realize that we're all very privileged to have the education that you all have been talking about social justice-wise. And I think one of the challenges that we have is deciding exactly what we want to do in terms of picking a problem to choose to fight for. And if you could give us any advice as to choosing which path of all of the ones that we've already listed to kind of focus in on after we leave Agnes Scott, that would be great.
I know. Can I? I actually have a fairly simple answer, and it's a little bit more complicated to do. In all my years of being in the movement, I've never applied for a job. And how have I avoided that? It's because what you do, the best way to approach social justice work is to graze, kind of like dining at a buffet. You volunteer and work at a variety of different organizations without necessarily making a commitment. And then you'll find out what you absolutely love doing, what you're passionate about, and then you figure out how to get paid to do it. If you start out looking for a paycheck, that's not going to happen. You have to start out looking for your passion. And once you find that passion, then you can construct a way to survive doing what you're passionate about. And that's been my solution for social justice. And so I would suggest that while you're a student, take advantage of those leadership opportunities and community service opportunities, like in Dr. Williams' classes and stuff. Get a chance to graze around at different social justice organizations, see what kind of work they do, go beyond that and maybe look at some other places and figure out what really gets you excited. And then construct a plan to get paid doing that thing that gets you excited.
Yeah, and I would add to that, just jump in too, and you figure things out as you go. Often you figure out what you don't like so much, where your skills aren't really attuned for, and then, the doors start opening, the path becomes clear, I think.
Whatever you're in, remember, stand up and speak up. Oh, if it's a more subtle approach, try that. But that's in every phase of the work you go into, you can help with social justice, because we're way behind and going behind and behind them.
And if you simply can't choose, I would say teach literature.
Or either learn more about politics.
It's all in there, all the problems of the world.
Okay, my question kind of has two components to it. I feel like oftentimes when we discuss feminism in large groups that we end up talking or referring to dichotomies such as like masculine, feminine, man, woman, and I think that certain bodies or that don't fit or identities, gender expressions that don't fit into those dichotomies kind of get lost, whether that's intersex bodies, trans identities, cisgendered identities get lost. And I'm wondering, how can we continue to talk about all this important work and include all bodies and not continue to do this? Like, make people invisible, but also focus on women's rights. And the second component is, like, you talked about how important human rights was. How does women's studies and human rights studies come together without losing the women's studies component that's so essential?
Okay, two huge questions.
Sorry.
You want to start with the first one? All right.
Yeah, because this is not only a philosophical or theoretical issue for me, but it's one that has practical implications for my work. Obviously, I'm the leader of Sisters on Women of Color Reproductive Health Collective, and we try to be inclusive, and yet we're constantly dealing with the issue of defining that inclusivity, even being challenged on using the word women in our collective, when in fact what we are coming to the slow realization is we cannot make anyone visible by making ourselves invisible, because an invisible person really can't help lift up anybody else. And so we have to figure out a way of inclusivity that not only doesn't reify or reinforce the binary system that you talk about, because as professors Hackett's Packets taught me. There is a continuum of these things, but also doesn't invisibilize people finding themselves on either end of that binary system. It's really a hard task for us. I think what's really happening, though, with the transgender and the LGBT movement is that it's forcing us to question all of those assumptions. But it's also forcing us to recognize that this whole conversation grew out of feminism. It grew out of questioning the normalcy of oppressions in a real serious way. The other question about human rights and women's rights, well, first of all, women's rights are human rights, so there is no binary between those two fields either. It's all one and the same in terms of women's rights being included within the human rights framework. What we have in common is our humanity, and we really need to develop a sense of politics that doesn't celebrate difference, but celebrate what we have together. And that's what the human rights framework demands that we do. Now, that doesn't mean we all have to be the same to enjoy our human rights, because everybody is an individual and is different, just like every human being may have the right to an education, but a blind child might need her books in Braille. We all have individual characteristics, but we all should enjoy the same human rights. And so part of our rethinking about this in a practical way is to stop focusing on our differences, not to pretend that they don't exist, but stop using them as a way to draw wedges between ourselves and the people we must work with, and the people we must be with, and the people we must love. I mean, all of this has to come together. It's not an easy answer, and I think that's what's exciting about transgender politics right now is that it's pushing the envelopes on all of those assumptions for us right now and making us have conversations in ways we did not have before. But I am pretty clear that the way we're going to figure this out is to create a, how do they say it in Africa? They once told me that a lit candle loses nothing by lighting another.
Right.
And that's kind of how we have to see it. That now that we in the women's movement have gotten a lot of clarity, how can we light the candle for the transgender movement? How can we light the candle for the intersex movement? How can we light the candle for all of these movements so that we end all forms of oppression?
Well, I think one wonderful thing about the women's studies programs that has certainly come about since I've been an adult, graduated from college or whatever, it's that we cannot solve problems until you learn about the problems. And that has certainly concentrated and opened up the door for lots of women. And I am so pleased that there are people who have said to me, well, when are we going to have a men's studies program? And I said, that's been in since the beginning of time. So we must focus on some of the problems if we're going to learn how to solve them. And I'm delighted that it's part of the program here, the curricula, and in other colleges and universities. And each can solve it in a different way. I chose to solve some of the problems by the political method, and other people have done it in churches and some, like I have, and probably tried to do it in both. So it's we're all facing the problems.
Anyone else on the panel want to address either of those two questions? No? Okay. Okay.
Hi, I have a question. I'm a Woodruff scholar as well. I'm a fresh woman. I have two small children. I have a 6-year-old son, and I have a 3-year-old daughter. And I'm wondering if any of you all, whether because you're an auntie or a mom or a grandma or a mentor, have encountered the challenge of trying to and just impart wisdom and deal with the challenges of our times, and trying to explain these things to children, but also have them still be able to feel safe and secure and loved, and all of those things. Like, for instance, my children, we don't watch Curious George. I don't allow them to watch Curious George because of the colonialist and racist implications. And having to explain that, to a 6-year-old or a 3-year-old, those aren't the terms that I'm using, but how can I, whatever it is, whether it's racism, sexism, wanting my children, wanting better things for them, hoping that, I can, hoping that they will not be as indoctrinated in some ways as I have been, but still be able to have them, be joyful and hopeful. And have you ever, I'm just wondering if you guys have dealt with those challenges, and how do you deal with those?
I don't want to keep grabbing the mic if other people want to speak to it.
I think Dee may have something. Did you want to say? Go ahead.
Well, I tell you, the media problem is a problem that we're facing, and you mentioned it. We have a problem with the media. They really cultivate a cult of violence. Whatever program you're into, even if you just go to the movies and they show the previews. I said, they're showing me a bunch of stuff that I don't want to see because it is so filled with violence. And people have said that we are a violent nation. And, of course, we have the gun problem, which creates violence in my mind. But another thing is these prejudices, like the song from South Pacific, they have to be carefully taught. Also, you can carefully teach the young 3-year-old. Actually, I don't think it's good to let them look at television until they're a little bit older because of the media problem with the violence. But you can teach people away from prejudices, because if you teach your prejudices, it's one of my friends says, there's no reason why I shouldn't teach the way I feel about these people to my children. And I said, I guess that's the way it's perpetuated, just to teach your prejudices to your children. Well, you can unteach them too. And that's part of being a parent, I think, to be sure that they know that they're in a loving family and that's the way to face people with compassion. So that's one way. It's a problem in today's world.
Rudder, you want to add something?
First of all, I would question the possibility in a racist, homophobic, sexist, violent world whether you can raise a child free of that taint. I'm not quite sure you can. Because I noticed, as I said earlier, when I was parenting my son, and I had an intentional thing around males and violence and all of that, I could not protect him from the influences of his peers, his schools, his uncle who was in the military. And I didn't want to alienate him from my family just because they were very militaristic. So you really can't insulate your child, and actually you're not serving them well by insulating them. I think the best way to parent your children is to always tell them the truth. And sometimes, and we should stop thinking of childhood as that protected zone where they're insulated from the truth that they get slapped in the face with the minute they leave our front door and they find out the world ain't the one you constructed inside your home. And I'm not saying, really brutalize them or anything like the world will do. But at the same time, the more you can share truth with your children, the more, first of all, they'll come to you for answers when they are faced with these kinds of issues and their problems. The parents that the children don't come to are the parents who lied to their children, trying to protect them, and then lost all their credibility with their children when the children really had a tough issue to deal with. And so that may be one parenting advice I would give. And also raising your child to be a skeptic, to be a critical thinker, to really maybe not look at the Curious George show, but to look at the Curious George show and teaching her how to do media analysis of the show, so that then everything she sees on the media, then after, she knows how to take an analysis too. Yeah. That might be another way of looking at that.
Okay, we have time just for one more question.
Hello. Each of you is incredibly different. We saw that when you came up. You carry yourselves different. You're completely unique, and that's because you're people. At the same time, you're not completed people. That's part of what being human is. And Trish approached it. Loretta mentioned it. Each of you in your own way has said it. You're still growing. You're still learning things. You mentioned that... could you repeat your name? I know it. I'm scared of the mic right now.
Deepika.
Deepika? Thank you, Deepika. You mentioned that, what was it? I'm so scared of the mic. You said, I can't quote it. The point being,
is it was memorable.
It was very memorable. Each of you is how do you continue to be yourself when you have all these people telling you what you're supposed to be, and what you're telling yourself you're supposed to look like, what women are telling you you're supposed to look like, whether they are puritanical or whether they are just out there, whether they are feminists, whether they are very weak women. What do you do when you're in the face of men? Each of you is doing that in your own way, and you're trying to stay true to yourselves. How are you doing that?
You get better with age. That's all I can say.
I want to get old fast.
In my 20s, I was very vulnerable to everybody's opinion of me because I had not completed my own identity formation, and I was working at the Rape Crisis Center, so I was a very vulnerable, still in my formative, didn't know what I stood for stage. I knew what everybody was telling me. By the 30s, I got old enough to actually push back on my mama and say, oh no, that may be your trip, but I ain't going there with you. You know? By the time I was in my 40s and 50s, particularly the 50s, I was like, screw y'all, I know who I am. So it's a process that is age specific, but I swear it gets much better with age.
That it does. It's hard to decide what you really think about things until you really explore it. And if you explore it deeply enough and get convinced enough, sometimes if you don't close your mind, you might even change your opinion and your passion about things. But you have to explore it from many different angles, and that does come with age and experience. And I hate to say it, but I've had to change my mind on things. But it comes with age and experience.
Also, this is something I've been reluctant to mention up to this point, although it's crossed my mind several times. Yes, stand up, speak up, and learn, engage with the world. One of the things that I got from my culture growing up in India was to actually shut out the noise and the busyness of the world. Just be quiet. Be quiet, and I'm sorry if this sounds a little hokey. I strongly believe in meditation at any age, including with children, not just turning off the TV, just turning everything off. I think we have strong voices inside us that give us joy, that tell us who we are. Be absolutely still. Say nothing. Take nothing in. Just be by yourself. Do nothing at times. Absolutely be nothing. Do nothing, and see what grows out of that. That quiet space in which you feel you're there, and you rarely ever feel that because we're always doing something. We're expected to be somewhere. and you sit down, just quiet down for even 5 minutes every day, there's joy in knowing that you're alive. That's when you exist. You feel your breath, and that's very joyful.
And on the flip side of that, on the outward journey, I would say maybe look for and celebrate the uniqueness and differences in everybody, because they're there, and really focus on those. And I think that gives us a sense of safety and comfort, and expressing our own uniqueness and being different and going against the grain. And
So I think we have to wrap up, sadly. But if you could all join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.
A wonderful audience. And good